Gordon Phillips looked out the viewing port of the USS Venture as the massive Axioni ship approached. The diplomatic vessel had traveled for 3 weeks to reach this meeting point in neutral space. Gordon wiped his sweaty palms on his civilian clothes, simple black pants and a blue button-up shirt. As the ship's lead xenobiologist, he wasn't required to wear a uniform like the military personnel on board. "Nervous, Dr. Phillips?" asked Captain Richard Miller, his crisp naval uniform, adorned with medals and insignia that marked him clearly as a high-ranking military officer. "Just excited, Captain. First contact with a coalition of 3 different alien species. This is what I've worked for my entire career." Captain Miller nodded with a tight smile. "Just remember the protocols. The Axioni sent very specific instructions about this meeting." Gordon watched as the military personnel on the bridge straightened their uniforms. Everyone was dressed in their best. The military in formal dress uniforms, the diplomats in official Earth government attire with pins and badges showing their ranks and departments. Susan Carter stepped up beside Gordon. She was part of the science team, specializing in xenobotany. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore plain clothes similar to Gordon's. "Quite the show of force they're bringing," Susan said quietly, nodding toward the alien vessel. 4 escort ships for 1 diplomatic meeting. "They're probably just being cautious like us," Gordon replied, though something about the formation of the ships made him uneasy. The communication screen flickered to life, revealing the face of General Vrask, the Axioni commander. The alien had gray-blue skin with ridge-like formations along his jawline. His uniform was elaborate, covered in what Gordon assumed were military decorations. "Captain Miller, we welcome the representatives of Earth," General Vrask said, his translation device converting his clicks and rumbles into English. "Prepare for boarding. We will continue discussions on our vessel." Captain Miller frowned. "That wasn't the agreement, General. The meeting was to take place on neutral ground." "Plans have changed," Vrask replied simply, and the screen went dark. "The Captain turned to his crew. "Battle stations, this doesn't feel right." Before anyone could move, the ship shuddered violently. Gordon grabbed the wall to steady himself. "They've locked onto us with tractor beams," shouted the tactical officer. "Weapon systems are not responding." "They're jamming our communications," added another officer. Captain Miller's face hardened. "All military personnel, prepare for possible hostile boarding. Civilians get to the designated safe areas." Gordon felt Susan's hand on his arm. "This way," she said calmly, pulling him toward the exit. They hurried through the corridors with other civilian staff members. Gordon's heart pounded in his chest as the ship shook again. "What's happening?" asked a young geologist, his voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, a loud hissing sound filled the corridor as the airlock at the far end was forced open. Gray-blue figures in heavy armor poured through the opening, weapons raised. "Run!" someone shouted. Gordon turned to flee, but more Axioni soldiers appeared at the other end of the corridor. They were trapped. "Humans, do not resist," commanded one of the aliens. "You will not be harmed if you comply." Gordon raised his hands, slowly. Around him, the other civilians did the same. Susan stood beside him, her face calm but her eyes darting around, taking in every detail. The Axioni moved efficiently, herding the humans together. Gordon noticed they were scanning everyone, with handheld devices. "This one is military," an alien soldier said, pointing to a woman Gordon recognized as a communications specialist who wasn't in uniform, but had a military bearing. They separated her from the group. They continued scanning, pulling out several. More people who Gordon hadn't realized were military personnel. They were all wearing civilian clothes. Technicians, cooks, and support staff who held military rank but didn't wear uniforms for their regular duties. Soon the Axioni had divided them into 2 groups. Those in military uniforms are identified as military by their scans, and civilians. Gordon found himself in the civilian group with Susan and about 30 others. As they were marched through the ship, Gordon saw more crew members being sorted similarly. The captain and officers, easily identified by their uniforms, were led away in restraints. The civilian group was taken to a large cargo hold that had been hastily converted into a detention area. Force field barriers separated sections of the room. What do they want? Gordon whispered to Susan as they were processed and pushed into one of the sections. Information, most likely, she replied quietly. Or maybe we're hostages. Hours passed. Gordon paced the limited space, watching as more humans were brought in. He counted at least 60 civilians now sharing their section of the hold. Later, General Vrask himself entered with a group of officers. He walked along the force field studying the humans. Your military personnel have been secured, Vrask announced. As civilians, you will not be harmed. Your government will be contacted with our demands. Gordon stepped forward. Why are you doing this? We came in peace. Vrask tilted his head, studying Gordon. Your species has a reputation, human. Your adaptability makes you unpredictable. Unpredictable species are dangerous. After the general left, Gordon tried to access a wall panel, thinking he might reach the ship's communication system. The noise he made attracted guards, and he was roughly grabbed and dragged to a separate holding cell. This one was attempting to access our systems, the guard reported to a superior. The Axioni officer approached Gordon, scanning him thoroughly. No military training or implants, just a foolish civilian. He gestured to the guards. Put him with the others. They threw Gordon back into the main holding area. As night cycle began and the lights dimmed, he found himself sitting next to Susan. That was risky, she whispered. What were you trying to do? Contact Earth somehow, Gordon admitted. Stupid idea. Susan studied him carefully. Then she glanced around to ensure no one was listening before leaning closer. Not stupid, just untrained, she said, in a voice so low Gordon barely heard it. Did you notice how they separated everyone in uniform first? How confident General Vrask was that they'd secured all military personnel. Gordon nodded slowly. Susan's eyes met his, and something changed in her expression. A hardness, a focus he hadn't noticed before. Not all soldiers wear uniforms, Gordon, she whispered, and that's going to be their biggest mistake. Gordon did not sleep much that night. He kept thinking about Susan's words. He watched her from across the holding area as she moved among the other civilians, talking quietly with some of them. There was something different about the way she carried herself now. Confident, alert, purposeful. 3 days passed in captivity. The Axioni kept the humans fed and gave them basic necessities, but they were still prisoners. Gordon noticed that Susan seemed to be forming relationships with specific people among the civilians. A muscular man named Alan Rodriguez, who had been part of the maintenance crew, a quiet woman called Natalie Wilson, who worked as a medical researcher, and a friendly cook named Kyle Bennett. On the 4th day, the Axioni began moving prisoners to different sections of their ship. Gordon found himself in a group with Susan and her 3 friends as they were marched down a long corridor. Where are they taking us? Gordon whispered. Probably redistributing us throughout their fleet, Susan replied softly. Easier to control us if we're separated. Their Axioni guards stopped at an intersection to receive new orders through their communication devices. For a brief moment, the guards looked away from the prisoners. What happened next was so fast, Gordon almost missed it. Susan made a small hand gesture, and instantly she and her 3 friends moved in perfect coordination. Alan grabbed the nearest guard from behind, his arm wrapping around the alien's neck in a precise hold. Natalie slipped behind another guard and struck a specific spot on his back that made him collapse instantly. Susan disarmed a 3rd guard with movements so fluid they seemed rehearsed hundreds of times. Kyle caught the 4th guard's weapon before it hit the floor. The entire attack took less than 5 seconds. 4 armed guards were now unconscious on the floor. The other civilians stood frozen in shock. Susan held a finger to her lips, signaling everyone to be quiet. She checked the corridor in both directions, then made another hand gesture. To Gordon's surprise, her 3 companions immediately secured the guards' weapons, took communication devices, and positioned themselves at defensive angles around the group. Then Susan did something unexpected. She handed the weapons back to Kyle, who quickly hid them in an access panel in the wall. Susan gave some kind of signal, and everyone returned to their original positions just as another group of Axioni guards turned the corner. "What happened here?" demanded the lead guard, seeing his comrades on the floor. "They just fell over," Gordon said, finding his voice. "Maybe something's wrong with their environmental suits?" The new guards looked suspicious but called for medical assistance. The human prisoners were quickly herded away to a different detention area. That night, Gordon managed to position himself next to Susan in their new holding cell. "What was that?" he whispered. "Who are you really?" Susan studied him carefully before answering. "Someone who might be able to get us all home alive if you can keep a secret." "I can keep a secret." Susan hesitated, then nodded. "We're Shadow Protocol operators. Special forces, but not the kind that wear uniforms or announce their presence. Like undercover agents, more specialized. We're embedded with civilian operations, diplomatic missions, science expeditions, colony ships. We appear to be normal staff, scientists, technicians, support personnel, but we're trained military operators." Gordon's mind raced. "The Axioni separated everyone in uniform." "Exactly," Susan said. "They think they've isolated all Earth's military capability because they identified everyone with obvious military training or implants. But they missed us. Shadow Protocol operators have no special implants, no military records accessible by standard scans. We're ghosts. You could have escaped back there. Why didn't you? And go where? We're on an alien ship in deep space. Besides, our mission is to protect the civilians, not abandon them." Susan leaned closer. "Alan, Natalie, and Kyle are also operators. There are 9 of us total spread throughout the ship. We've been working since day 1, gathering intelligence, mapping the ship, learning routines. So what's the plan? First, we figure out where they're taking us, then we establish communication between our scattered teams. After that..." Susan's expression hardened. "We take control of key systems and wait for rescue." "Rescue? How would Earth even know where to find us?" Susan smiled slightly. "We've been leaving breadcrumbs, small data bursts hidden in their own communication signals. Nothing they'd notice, but enough for our people to track." The next day, the prisoners were put to work in various parts of the ship. Gordon was assigned to the science labs, studying Earth biology samples the Axioni had confiscated. He was surprised to learn they considered humans physically inferior to most galactic species. "Your muscle density is low, your reaction time is slow, and you have no natural defenses," explained the Axioni scientist supervising him. "Yet somehow, your species has survived and thrived. We need to understand how." Gordon worked carefully, learning what he could about Axioni technology while appearing to be a cooperative prisoner. He noticed that Susan had been assigned to communications due to her supposed linguistics background. Alan was working in engineering, Natalie in medical, and Kyle in food preparation. They had positioned themselves throughout critical areas of the ship. During a meal break, Gordon watched an Axioni news broadcast that showed their fleet approaching a massive space station. The aliens were taking them to their homeworld. That evening, when the prisoners returned to their holding area, Susan sat beside Gordon. "I need your help," she said quietly. "You understand biology better than any of us. The Axioni have weaknesses we can exploit, but we need to know more about their physiology." "What kind of weaknesses?" "Sensory limitations, reaction to certain compounds, physical vulnerabilities. Anything we can use without causing permanent harm." Gordon thought about the data he had seen in the lab. Their respiratory system is sensitive to certain compounds, and their vision has a blind spot to specific light wavelengths we can see. Susan nodded. "Perfect. One more thing. They've never encountered guerrilla tactics before. Their entire military structure is based on direct confrontation. The concept of fighters disguised as non-combatants is completely foreign to them. So they can't even imagine what you're planning," Gordon realized. "Exactly. And that's why we'll succeed." Susan looked at Gordon with newfound respect. "You've just been promoted, Dr. Phillips. Welcome to the team." Over the next few days, Gordon worked closely with Susan and her team. The Axioni fleet was 3 days away from reaching their homeworld. Whatever they were going to do, they needed to do it fast. The Shadow team had established a communication system using subtle hand signals and marks left in common areas. Gordon was amazed at how they could exchange complex information right under the noses of their captors. The Axioni have never dealt with guerrilla warfare, Susan explained during a quiet moment in the lab. Their entire military is built around direct confrontation. They announce themselves with uniforms, fight face-to-face, and follow strict rules of engagement. Like ancient human warfare, Gordon said, thinking back to his history classes. Before modern tactics. Exactly. The concept of fighters blending with civilians doesn't exist in their culture. It would be dishonorable. That's our advantage. Gordon spent his time in the lab studying Axioni biology while pretending to cooperate with their research. He discovered several useful weaknesses in their physiology. Their inner ear is highly sensitive to specific sound frequencies, he told Susan, and certain chemicals affect their ability to process oxygen. Nothing lethal, but enough to cause dizziness and confusion. Susan nodded. Perfect. We're already putting your information to good use. The Shadow team's plan was unfolding across the ship. Alan, working in engineering, had secretly modified gravity controls in key areas. Natalie had created harmless but effective compounds in the medical lab that could temporarily incapacitate Axioni guards. Kyle, with his job in food preparation, helped distribute these compounds in the guards' meals. The effects were beginning to show. Guards were reporting illness and equipment malfunctions. The Axioni couldn't figure out what was happening. Some blamed an Earth virus. Others suspected faulty equipment. No one suspected deliberate sabotage from what they considered helpless civilians. On the 5th day, Gordon was called to a meeting with the ship's science commander, a senior Axioni named Kelth. You have knowledge of human biology, Kelth said. Our crew is experiencing strange symptoms after exposure to humans. Explain this. Gordon saw an opportunity and took it. Humans and Axioni are biologically very different. Our bacteria and viruses are harmless to us but might affect your people in unpredictable ways. It's probably just an incompatibility between our species. Kelth looked concerned. Could these effects be dangerous? I don't think so, Gordon replied, carefully choosing his words. But to be safe, you might want to limit contact between our species. This was exactly what the Shadow team wanted. The more the Axioni isolated the humans, the more freedom the operators would have to work. Later that day, Gordon overheard 2 Axioni officers talking about a fleet-wide order to minimize contact with human prisoners. Susan's plan was working. That evening, Susan gathered Gordon, Alan, Natalie, and Kyle in a secluded corner of their holding area. We have 3 key objectives, she said quietly. First, disable their weapon systems. Second, take control of communications to contact Earth forces. Third, create enough confusion to prevent them from regaining control before help arrives. Are Earth forces even looking for us? Gordon asked. Susan nodded. I've been sending signals through their communication system for days. Our military knows exactly where we are. They're coming, but we need to be ready. The team discussed the plan in detail. Each person had specific tasks. Even Gordon had a role to play. Your job is to reinforce the biological threat, Susan told him. Keep pushing the idea that human proximity is causing their symptoms. The more they isolate us, the better. The next day, Gordon was surprised when Kelth and a team of Axioni scientists called him to their main medical facility. They were examining sick crew members. These symptoms began after contact with humans, Kelth explained. Dizziness, confusion, weakness. Is this normal when species first meet? Gordon put on a concerned expression. It could be cross-species, contamination. Earth has thousands of microbes that live harmlessly in our bodies. They might affect your people differently. How do we stop it? Demanded another scientist. Isolation is the only guaranteed method, Gordon said. Minimize all contact with humans and human areas. The scientists looked worried. One of them turned to Kelth. We should inform the fleet commander. Gordon was escorted back to his holding area, hiding his satisfaction. The Axioni were playing right into their hands. That night, the first major phase of the plan went into action. Alan had rigged the gravity systems in key areas of the ship to malfunction. At precisely the same time, Natalie's compounds reached maximum effect in the guards who had consumed them. Throughout the ship, Axioni crew members experienced sudden vertigo as gravity shifted unpredictably and the chemicals affected their balance. In the confusion, Kyle and two other shadow operators moved through the ship, accessing critical systems and planting devices Susan had created from modified communication equipment. These devices would allow them to interfere with the ship's controls when the time came. Gordon watched Susan working on what looked like a small transmitter, her fingers moving with practiced precision. "How did you become a shadow operator?" he asked quietly. Susan didn't look up from her work. "I was military first. Special forces. Then they recruited me for this program. We trained for years, not just combat skills, but how to blend in completely with civilian life. I have a real degree in xenobotany. I've published research papers. My cover isn't just a cover, it's a complete identity." "And the others?" "The same. Alan really is an expert engineer. Natalie is a qualified medical researcher. Kyle is actually a talented chef. We're selected for existing skills that would be valuable on civilian missions, then trained as operators." Gordon thought about this. "So you live double lives?" Susan finally looked up at him. "Not exactly. We're always both. Scientists and soldiers, civilians and operators. That's why the Axioni couldn't detect us, because we truly are what we appear to be. We're just more than that too." The next morning, the Axioni fleet entered orbit around their homeworld. Gordon could see it through a viewport, a massive blue-green planet with 3 moons. An announcement came over the ship's communication system. All human prisoners would be transferred to a secure facility on the planet's surface within hours. Susan gathered her team one last time. "This is it. Once they start moving us to the surface, we'll have our best chance. Alan's gravity disruptions will create chaos in the shuttle bays. Natalie's compounds have been distributed to most of the security personnel. Kyle's team has rigged key systems for remote shutdown." She looked at each of them. "Earth forces will arrive within 6 hours. We just need to hold until then." Gordon felt a mixture of fear and excitement. "What do you need me to do?" Susan handed him a small device. "Keep this with you. When I give the signal, press this button. It will activate all the disruptors we've planted throughout the ship at once." She put her hand on his shoulder. "You've done well, Gordon. You think like one of us." Gordon looked at the device in his hand. "I'm just a scientist." Susan smiled. "So am I. That's the point. The Axioni never understood what they were dealing with. To them, warriors wear uniforms and civilians are harmless. They never imagined humans could be both." An alarm sounded throughout the ship. The transfer to the surface was beginning. The Axioni began moving groups of human prisoners toward the shuttle bays. Gordon clutched the small device Susan had given him, keeping it hidden in his palm. His group was scheduled for the 3rd shuttle. Susan and Alan were in his group, while Natalie and Kyle had been placed in different transfer groups. As they were marched down the corridor, Gordon noticed the Axioni guards keeping their distance. The fear of human contamination had spread throughout the ship. This gave the shadow operators more freedom to communicate using their subtle hand signals. Susan made a small gesture to Alan, who nodded slightly. Moments later, the ship's gravity fluctuated, guards stumbled, and alarms began to sound. "Equipment malfunction in Section 7, announced the ship's communication system. The guards looked nervous. One of them spoke into his communicator, receiving orders. "Continue the transfer," he told the others. "The engineers are handling the malfunction." They resumed moving toward the shuttle bay, but Gordon could sense the growing tension among the Axioni. More alerts sounded, reporting problems in different parts of the ship. When they reached the shuttle bay, Gordon saw something that made his heart race, a chance to learn valuable information. The bay had a large command center overlooking the shuttles, and inside he could see high-ranking Axioni officers gathered around displays, clearly discussing the mounting problems on their fleet. I need to use the bathroom, Gordon told the nearest guard, pointing to what he knew was a waste disposal facility near the command center. The guard hesitated, then nodded. Be quick. A different guard will escort you. As Gordon was led past the command center, he slowed his pace, straining to hear the conversation inside. The door was partially open, and voices carried out into the corridor. 3 ships reporting the same symptoms among crew, said one officer. This human contamination is spreading faster than anticipated. Another voice responded. Gordon recognized. It is Admiral Jean, the fleet commander he had seen in broadcasts. We should never have brought them onto our ships. Transfer them to the surface immediately and decontaminate all vessels. Admiral, said a third voice, could this be deliberate? Could the humans be causing these malfunctions somehow? There was a pause. Impossible, Admiral John replied. We identified and contained all their military personnel. The rest are just civilians, scientists, support staff, non-combatants. They have no combat training or capabilities. A fourth voice spoke up, softer, more thoughtful. Admiral, I have been studying human history. Their warfare evolved differently from ours. They don't always follow the universal codes of combat. Explain, Jean demanded. In ancient human conflicts, they sometimes used fighters who did not identify themselves as warriors. They called them guerrilla fighters or undercover operatives. They would blend with civilian populations. Gordon heard what sounded like laughter from multiple officers. Next, you'll suggest their diplomats might be soldiers too, Admiral Jean said mockingly. That would violate every principle of warfare recognized by civilized species. No, officer. Kurtz, the humans are not that devious. These are simply biological incompatibilities and equipment failures. Nothing more. The guard urged Gordon to continue moving. He finished using the facility and rejoined his group, catching Susan's eye. She raised an eyebrow questioningly. They think this is all just coincidence, Gordon whispered when he got the chance. They can't imagine soldiers disguised as civilians. Susan nodded slightly. Good. Their blindness is our advantage. The first shuttle was loaded with prisoners and departed for the surface. Gordon's group moved forward in line for the second shuttle. Suddenly, all lights in the bay flickered and went out, plunging the area into darkness. Emergency lighting came on seconds later, casting everything in a dim red glow. In that brief moment of darkness, Susan had moved. When the lights returned, she was now standing beside a different guard. Gordon watched in amazement as she subtly reached into the guard's equipment pouch and removed what looked like an access card. The guard never noticed. More alarms sounded. The ship's communication system announced, critical systems failure in multiple sections. All non-essential personnel return to quarters. Security teams report to command. The remaining guards looked at each other in confusion. Their leader received new orders through his communicator. Delay the prisoner transfer, he told the others. Secure them in holding area B4 until further notice. Gordon's group was led to a small room near the shuttle bay. Once inside, Susan immediately went to work. Using the stolen access card, she approached a wall panel and removed its cover. What are you doing? A civilian woman asked nervously. Getting us home, Susan replied without looking up. Alan moved to the door, keeping watch. Hurry, he told Susan. They'll figure out something's wrong soon. Susan connected several wires from the wall panel to a small device she pulled from her hidden pocket. Gordon now, she said. Gordon pressed the button on the device he'd been carrying. Throughout the ship, all the disruptors planted by the Shadow team activated at once. The effects were immediate. The lights went out completely. The door locks disengaged. Even the artificial gravity faltered momentarily. Susan finished her work at the panel. I've tapped into their internal communication system. Now we can hear their orders and I can send our own signal to Earth forces. She activated her device and spoke into it. Shadow protocol active. USS Venture crew requires immediate extraction. Sending coordinates now. Gordon heard panicked Axioni voices coming through Susan's device as their communication channels filled with reports of system failures across the fleet. Now for Phase 2, Susan announced. She nodded to Alan, who quickly gathered several civilians. Anyone, With technical skills, come with me, Alan said. We're going to help secure the shuttle bay. Natalie's voice suddenly came through Susan's device. Medical section secured. They're completely disoriented from the compounds. No casualties. Then Kyle reported in. Command deck access obtained. They're in chaos up here. No one suspects the kitchen worker who brought them meals for days. Susan turned to Gordon. This is the moment where we find out if we're good enough. We need to hold key positions until Earth forces arrive. How long? Gordon asked. 4 hours, maybe 5. Gordon looked around at the civilians. Most looked terrified, but some were already organizing themselves, following Alan's directions. He realized that humans adapted quickly, even in the most extreme situations. We can do this, Gordon said with more confidence than he felt. Susan handed him a captured Axioni weapon. You're not a soldier, Gordon, but right now, you need to act like one. He took the weapon, surprised at how natural it felt in his hands. Just show me what to do. Susan smiled. That's the human spirit they never understood. Over the next hour, the shadow operators coordinated their efforts across the ship. Natalie used her medical knowledge to create more compounds that would disorient, but not harm the Axioni. Kyle maintained control of the command deck access points. Alan and his team secured the shuttle bay, preparing for eventual evacuation. Gordon worked alongside Susan, helping to coordinate the other civilians. Many of them stepped up, revealing skills and courage they might never have known they possessed. Through it all, they could hear the Axioni commanders trying desperately to understand what was happening. How could simple civilians do this? 1. Commander demanded over the communication system. It's impossible, Admiral John's voice replied, sounding shaken for the first time. Find Officer Kurtz. I want to know more about these guerrilla fighters he mentioned. Susan looked at Gordon and smiled. Too late, Admiral, she whispered, far too late. The next 3 hours were the longest of Gordon's life. The Shadow team had secured key areas of the Axioni flagship, but they were still vastly outnumbered. The aliens had recovered from their initial shock and were now organizing counterattacks. Susan established a makeshift command center in their holding area using the communication system she had hacked. Reports came in from shadow operators throughout the fleet. Shuttle bay secure, Alan reported. We can evacuate civilians when rescue arrives. Medical bay holding, came Natalie's voice. I've sealed the doors and released mild sedative gas into the ventilation system around our perimeter. Command deck access still controlled, Kyle added. But they're getting more aggressive. We won't hold much longer. Susan checked the time. Earth forces should be less than an hour out. We just need to maintain control of these key points. Gordon helped organize the civilians into groups, each with specific tasks. Some helped treat injuries, others monitored Axioni communications, and some served as lookouts. Everyone had a purpose, and Gordon was impressed by how quickly they adapted to the crisis. A group of Axioni soldiers attempted to breach the door to their holding area. They used cutting tools to try to get through the sealed entrance. They'll be through in minutes, Gordon warned. Susan nodded calmly. Everyone take cover behind the barricades. Remember your training, civilians. She had given brief combat instructions to everyone, focusing on simple defensive tactics. Gordon positioned himself with a small group behind an overturned table, weapon ready. Just as the door began to give way, a new sound filled the ship, deep, resonating booms that shook the entire structure. Susan smiled. That's not the Axioni. She checked her communication device and her face lit up. Earth forces have arrived. They're engaging the Axioni fleet. The cutting at the door stopped as the Axioni soldiers were called away to defend against this new threat. Through Susan's communication device, they heard the panicked voices of Axioni commanders. Human warships have appeared. How did they find us? One officer demanded. Admiral John's voice replied. Impossible. We're in Axioni space and we left no trail. Sir, said another voice. Officer Kurtz, Gordon realized. I believe the prisoners have been communicating with Earth forces somehow. The civilians, how? We confiscated all their technology. That's just it, sir, Kurtz insisted. I don't think they're all civilians. The sounds of battle grew louder. The ship shook, repeatedly as weapons fire struck its shields. Gordon could hear the Axioni fleet engaging with Earth ships. Susan's device suddenly crackled with a new voice. Strong, authoritative, and human. "This is Admiral Lisa Wright of the Earth Defense Force. Axioni Command, you are holding Earth. Citizens against their will, surrender and release them immediately or we will take them by force." Admiral John's reply was filled with anger. "You have violated Axioni space. This act of aggression will not stand." "We are here for our people," Admiral Wright responded firmly. "Nothing more. Your attack on a diplomatic vessel was the first act of aggression. Release our citizens now." While this exchange continued, Susan gathered the Shadow Team leaders via communication. "Earth forces are creating a diversion," she explained. "They're drawing Axioni attention to the outer ships while they position extraction teams near the flagship. We need to get all civilians to the main shuttle bay." Gordon helped organize the evacuation. The civilians moved in orderly groups through the corridors. Most Axioni soldiers were occupied with defending against the Earth fleet, leaving only minimal security inside the ships. When they reached the shuttle bay, Gordon saw Alan and his team had secured the area completely. Several Axioni shuttles stood ready. "Can anyone fly these?" Gordon asked. "I can," said a quiet man Gordon had barely noticed before. "I'm a pilot, not military, commercial transport." Susan nodded to him. "Perfect. Start prepping the largest shuttle." As the civilians began boarding, Gordon heard shouting from a corridor. A large group of Axioni soldiers had broken through and was charging toward them. Susan, Alan, and the other shadow operators formed a defensive line. Gordon found himself joining them, raising his weapon. The firefight was brief but intense. The shadow operators moved with incredible skill, taking precise shots and using the environment for cover. Gordon did his best to follow their example. Just as they were about to be overwhelmed, the wall behind the Axioni soldiers exploded inward. Through the smoke, Gordon saw human figures in full combat armor. "Earth Special Forces. Shadow Protocol. This is Vanguard Team," announced the lead soldier. "We're your ride home." The Earth soldiers pushed forward, securing a path to the shuttle bay. More troops arrived, helping to evacuate the civilians. Gordon found himself being ushered toward a human military shuttle that had docked directly with the Axioni ship. Inside the shuttle, Gordon collapsed into a seat, adrenaline still pumping through his system. Susan sat down beside him, her calm demeanor finally showing cracks of exhaustion. "We did it," Gordon said in disbelief. Susan nodded. The power of the unexpected. They never imagined civilians could be a threat. As the shuttle detached from the Axioni ship, Gordon looked out a viewport. He could see Earth vessels engaging the Axioni fleet, but not destroying them, just keeping them occupied while the rescue operation continued. Once safely aboard the Earth command ship, Gordon and the other civilians were given medical attention and food. The shadow operators were debriefed separately. Hours later, Gordon found Susan in the ship's observation deck, watching as Earth forces maintained a defensive position against the Axioni fleet. "Admiral Wright wants to speak with you," Susan told him. "Your insights on Axioni biology were crucial. You saved lives." Gordon shook his head. "I just did what anyone would do. You're the real heroes." Susan smiled. "That's not how we see it. Shadow Protocol isn't about heroics. It's about protecting our people by any means necessary." She paused. "The Admiral is offering you a position." "As what?" "I'm not a soldier. As a shadow consultant. Using your scientific knowledge in the field, you've proven you can handle yourself in a crisis." Gordon thought about it. "Would I have to wear a uniform?" Susan laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd heard from her. "That's the point, you wouldn't." Later, Gordon attended a diplomatic meeting where Admiral Wright faced Admiral John via video communication. The Axioni commander looked shaken but defiant. "Your use of disguised warriors violates all codes of warfare," Jean protested. "Military personnel must identify themselves as such." Admiral Wright's expression remained neutral. "We don't see it that way, Admiral. Our people are adaptable. Some serve multiple roles." "This changes everything," Jean said. We must establish new protocols for interaction between our species. We're open to discussion, Wright replied. A new treaty, perhaps. After the meeting, Gordon approached Admiral Wright. They still don't understand, do they? Wright shook her head. They want rules that clearly define who is a warrior and who isn't. They want uniforms and badges and clear lines. But that's not how humans work, Gordon said. No, the Admiral agreed. It's not. Susan joined them. The new treaty will include clauses requiring all military personnel to wear identifying markers. The Axioni think this protects them. Gordon understood immediately. But we'll still have shadow protocol. Of course, Admiral Wright said. It's in our nature to adapt, to find edges others don't see. The secret isn't just that our special forces don't wear uniforms, Gordon. The secret is that humans never stop finding new ways to survive. As Gordon looked out at the stars, he thought about how quickly his life had changed. 1 week ago, he was just a xenobiologist on a diplomatic mission. Now he understood something profound about humanity, something the Axioni might never comprehend. Humans didn't just adapt to their environment, they transformed themselves to meet any challenge. Scientists could become soldiers. Civilians could become warriors. The lines that other species drew between different roles were to humans simply suggestions, and that would always be humanity's greatest strength.